Sentry mode activated. Target acquired.
Hey there hunters, and welcome back to the Gunners Guild. So kind of like how I went and mashed up all my bow stuff together for Iceborne, today I'm going to be doing the same for bow guns. But rather than split the video for light bowgun and heavy bowgun, I'm just going to cover gunning in general because they're literally the same thing. Light bowgun just has a 0.8 times damage modifier. So to begin, let's just go over the differences between light bowgun and heavy bowgun so I can get that out of the way and stop splitting up between the two. So obviously the main difference between the two is mobility. We have heavy slow gun and light bufun. Slow gun has fat roll from Dark Souls, although it still has the same iframes as regular roll, so you can still dodge just fine, it's just got a slow ass recovery. And the light bowgun gets a short hop and then a slide after you shoot, and normal rolls otherwise. The short hop does have iframes as well, so that's kind of cool. Now light bowgun also strafes faster when shooting and moving. There's that, and it's actually super important because it lets light bowgun be able to just walk around most attacks and not have to roll, which lets it be able to use max might. Everything else for the controls is just kind of a joke because more so than bow guns are just aim and shoot. There's literally nothing else to them. I'm not going to teach you how to equip a scope. So outside of the mobility, the heavy and light bowguns also have different special ammo. Heavy bowgun has Wyvern Snipe and Wyvern Heart, whereas light bowgun only has landmines. So let's just go over these really quick. Wyvern Snipe is an 80-second cooldown, and when shot, can pierce the target up to 7 times. And you get 2 small explosions, then 2 medium explosions, and then up to 3 large explosions, and they get progressively stronger. So getting the juicy hit zone at the end is fairly important. Snipe does a good amount of raw fire and KO damage. You can get a KO with a single good snipe if the monster hasn't been KO'd already. You can use a bowgun mod to change this to a type 2 snipe that is a single hit, which is boosted depending on the monster's hit zone, your critical and super critical distance, and ultimately, unless you're doing sleep wake ups, it's not really worth using. It has a lower total motion value and significantly less KO than the type 1 variant. Wyvern Heart is that 50 round Gatling gun that takes 200 seconds to recharge. Each bullet has a motion value of 9, but there is a damage bonus as it ramps up and a penalty for missing. The Type 2 mod amplifies this by making it ramp up more and fall off more on a miss. It's very powerful special ammo when utilized properly, but it does require a good amount of investment to make worth using, like special ammo boost and ballistics and just a hell of a lot of raw. Also, it does have critical distance, so you can't just point blank it or be too far away, but again, that's why we also run ballistics. Wyvern Blast for the light bowgun are the landmines, which you get 3 of. They have a 60-second recharge timer, which is actually really nice for timing things in a hunt. They can detonate when hit, and detonate depend on the size of the hit. So they have up to 5 charges. A small explosion consumes 1 a charge, a medium explosion consumes 2, and the large explosion consumes 4. Ideally, you want to detonate them 4 times with a light hit, and then 1 with a big final hit. The only real way to hit the light explosion is by using spread or pierce that do a lot of little hits. There is a mod that lets you turn them into countermines, which you can hurl at the monster instead. You only get 1 explosion and will detonate when hit with an attack. If the landmine hits the ground, you have 1 second to set it off with you or a monster attack. These also scale depending on the size of the hit. I love these things. Unfortunately, requiring a mod slot to use them is a shame because light bowguns only have 4 mods, whereas heavy bowguns have 5. Speaking of, let's just get into bowgun mods. So there's a lot of mods to use on bowguns, and I'm basically going to split them up into 3 categories: ammo mods, damage mods, and etc. mods. For ammo mods, we have recoil and reload. These are the most important mods. Obviously, they reduce your reload and recoil on your ammo trees according to the chart when you're applying them. This is the biggest thing you need to know for bowguns. You can't judge a bowgun until you see what mods do for them. The raw and other shit probably doesn't matter anywhere near as much. All the bowguns treat mods differently. Spread 3 on one gun can lower with a different amount of mods compared to another gun that runs spread 3. They're not all the same. Anyway, your main focus here is just to make your primary ammo be in the best usable state as it can. So try to get your recoil and reload as low as you possibly can with at least 1 mod slot remaining. That's basically your goal. The next set of mods is damage mods: close range, long range, and scope for heavy bowgun. Close range mod is active from 0 to 600 units, which is about this far, and adds 20% damage on the first mod, 10% damage on the second, and 5% on the third and fourth. One close range mod is insanely important and should be prioritized over basically every other mod once you have your recoil and reload figured out. Long range mods start working at 1600 units, which is about this far, and it's really fucking stupid because good luck keeping monsters that far away. This can only be used as well with Pierce because Pierce is the only thing that can actually hit with critical distance out this far, and even Pierce doesn't want to be out this far. It boosts damage by 20% for the first rank, 15% for the second rank, and 5% for the third and fourth. I don't personally use long range mods often, maybe one on a Pierce heavy bowgun setup, but that is it. And then we have Scope for heavy bowgun. Scope sucks, but it's a 30% boost in damage when you're in that nice shiny critical distance, also known as super critical distance. This eye cancer mod is unfortunately too good to pass up and should always be used on heavy bowgun, except for things like sticky and clusters. It does work on elemental ammo, but it only buffs the raw portion sadly, but it would make it so much better if it was on the elemental side as well. Keeping the super critical distance is kind of a pain, and trying to manage that, your sight, and everything else is just kind of a nuisance, so a lot of people don't run the scope, which I understand. So the rest of the mods are kind of the etc. mixed mods. We have the Deviation Mod, which should basically never be used. Deviation in this game acts like recoil from other shooters. It adds a reticle kickback to your shots, which you can easily adjust for between your next shots, so don't worry about Deviation. Long barrel makes your shot's trajectory faster, and it's also dependent on the actual ammo type, so like Stickies are way more noticeable compared to normals. You also get a little bit more critical distance out of it, but it's like not that much, maybe 1 or 2 steps, not significant. And this does not apply to spread, unfortunately. Power barrel is reversed, it slows down your shots, which is great for elemental and pierce since you get more time in the monster. It also gives you a 10% boost in KO on your Stickies, which is fine, but it's not really that important. Shield mods for heavy bowgun are just that, they're shields. Each rank makes you take less chip damage and recoil on the recovery. 3 shield mods is for turning off your brain and just face tanking a monster, but 2 work pretty well. Honestly, I can't tell the difference between 3 and 4, and 1 is just garbage. I only really use shield mods for Glutton when I want to farm, but you can use them on Pierce as well. You can't shield with clusters, and I don't run it for the sticky cluster setups because of that, so just putting it out there. You can totally run shields now, but it's just way more casual, and you're going to be losing like pretty much all your close range damage mods by using it. Light bowgun gets evade reload mods, which are a huge mixed bag. They allow you to reload after you shoot with light bowgun, and they are the fastest reloads for sure. Having them means you don't need to run reload mods either. The problem with them is everything else. First is that you can only use them after a shot, and the window is pretty tight, so there will be times when you shoot and then the monster is going to be roaring or it's doing an attack, and you may not want to take that first hop and then slide, in which case you're going to lose your opportunity to reload, which is awful, because manually reloading a slow or very slow weapon just makes you want to throw your mouse out the window. Also, ledges will stop this reload if you jump off them or climb up them. Also, allies that hit you will stop this reload. Also, any monsters that bump into you will stop this reload. Also, you can stop this reload by dropping the input. I hope I got the point across that there's a lot that can go wrong with this, and I absolutely hate it. Oh, also, each mod only lets you load 1 ammo per roll, so rip anything bigger than clip size 2. It's too much of an investment, and a lot of guns force you to use it in Iceborne. It's fucking troublesome. That's everything about the guns except the ammo, which is everything about the guns. So let's get into ammo and stats and stuff. Before I jump into the actual ammos though, there is one giant disclaimer. There is a ton that goes on into determining what ammo is good for bowguns. Bowgun stats, the clip sizes, the recoil levels, the reload type, rapid fire or single shot, spare shot versus true spare shot. It's a lot. And unfortunately, it's too much to cram into this video, especially because it changes with every update, so please watch specific videos for that. This is just more of a mechanics overview and just kind of like an info dump. Okay, so let's start with normals and how normal they are. They hit decently hard, they have some decent range, and that's about it. There's nothing special about normals, and honestly, they'd be good ammo if they had any bowgun that could utilize them properly. The problem is that in base game we had Teroth Blitz support that had a clip size 8, rapid fire normal 2 on recoil 1 and fast reload, and could still cram in a close range mod. It was basically the best normals could ever possibly get, because we can't have rapid fire level 3 ammos. Unfortunately, we don't have that in Iceborne. The best we have is like recoil 2 rapid fire on a light bowgun with normal reload. Now the main issue with normals is that it has to do with the damage mods. Normals are weaker than spread by a pretty good amount, but because of so much of the bowgun damage comes from close range mods, you have to be in the same distance as spread to make use of them, because you can't use normals in the distance required for long range mods. You have to use them in close range mod distance. So if you're going to be using them up close, which is where spread is, why aren't you just using spread? It's stronger ammo. Although normal 3s are still solid enough for light bowgun with the Guild Palace bowgun, there's just nothing really that makes them stand out over the other ammos, unfortunately. There's just not a whole lot of good I can say about normals, unfortunately. You can make them work, but it's never going to be ideal. So let's move on to Pierce, more solid B tier ammo. This ammo has a large minimal crit distance required to have effective damage, so it usually has to run ballistics to make it usable at closer ranges. Monsters don't let you stay very far at all. Now, Pierce does have decent motion value and hits up to 9 times before the damage falls off to basically nothing. Now, other than the motion value, the main difference between Pierce ammo is that Pierce 1 has a longer gap in the ticks of damage, which doesn't seem like much on paper. It's a 0.017 seconds difference compared to Pierce 2 and 3, but it's immediately noticeable in game. And Pierce 2 and Pierce 3 is just a motion value jump, but a 2 motion value bump over 9 hits is actually pretty significant. Honestly, you're never going to get 9 good hits on a monster anyways, since most monsters aren't large enough for that, let alone large enough to have that much good hit zone chunks. Pierce can be boosted with the power barrel to slow down the projectile and make it easier to get more ticks on the monster. And Pierce is actually in a pretty good spot right now. It's usable on a good set of monsters such as Namiel, Nergigante, Diablos, Basilgoose, Anjanath, Uragon, Shara. Hell, you can even make it work on Zenogre if you shoot across the forelegs. It's almost never going to be ideal to use though, but it's nowhere near as bad as normals right now. The main downfall for Pierce, again, is the damage mods. Long range mods is impossible to keep up even if you're solo, and if you're going to be using ballistics and close range mods, you might as well be competing with spread again, and spread doesn't have to worry about the length of the hit zones. And now spread ammo. Of course, everyone is aware of spread ammo. It's been the best ammo since base game, and it doesn't look like that's changing anytime soon. Spread 3 motion value is absurdly high, and while playing in melee range as a gunner is very risky, it still doesn't feel fair, especially when you slap on those shields on the heavy bowgun. The distance is literally the only downside of the ammo itself. Its critical distance is from point blank to about 600 units, exactly where it needs to be for close range mods, which is a shame because it's the only ammo that gets exactly what it needs from those damage mods. On top of that, it also gets boosted by the scope, which makes the strongest ammo even stronger. We have a ton of options for spread in both light and heavy bowgun, and I've made several videos covering those already, but there's really no way to go wrong, as long as you aren't using spread ones. There's actually no reason to use those or any other level 1 ammos, like literally any level 1 ammo, so yeah. Anyway, spreads work basically on every monster, even ones with awful hit zones. The only monsters I don't actively hunt with spread ammo is pretty much just Rajang, because you can't tenderize his face, and his hind legs are so bad that even when tenderized, they're not exploitable. So yeah, they're bad. Otherwise, everything works. Hell, I've even used it on metal rafts. Once you break those faces, you're good to go with spreads. Okay, Stickies. I have covered these ones a few times, and I'm glad to see Stickies are good in Iceborne because they're basically never used in base game. Stickies do a good decent amount of damage and an absurd amount of KO, and you get to ignore all the game mechanics like hit zones, clutch claws, and aiming. They do have a little bit of a limited inventory size, but it's really not all that bad. Heavy bowguns can mitigate this a little bit by being able to use clusters and wyverns as additional supportive ammo, but light bowgun doesn't really have this option, unfortunately. The only other thing about Stickies you should know is that you only want to use Sticky 3s. There's absolutely no reason to use Sticky 2s, people, unless you've run out of Sticky 3 ammo, or need to use it as an evade reload tool for light bowgun. Stickies are solid ammo to use on any monster because they ignore hit zones, but they kind of feel like training wheels for gunning, to be honest. You don't have to do any aiming or anything like that, but hey, damage is damage. Stickies also have a damage cap that's fairly easy to get to. It's basically 2 times your weapon raw, so thinking stuff like artillery for 50%, beeline bombardier for 15, actually it might be 20, I'm not sure, and some extra raw skills like P performance is basically going to cap your damage out, so don't go too crazy on raw scaling for Stickies. Elemental MO. Okay, so Elemental MO is in a great spot post Safi Jiva. Not only do we get good bowguns for these element, but Safi armor is equally great at boosting elemental damage. All those percent bonuses from like the elemental damage skills and elemental crit are pretty bad because the base elemental value for elemental ammo is only 22 or 220. So they don't get a whole lot off those. Now Safi's flat 150 is just so much better. Anyway, elemental ammo is basically the new Pierce. They do Pierce, but with much longer gaps in their ticks compared to Pierce ammo. It's a 0.2 second versus the 0.05 from like Pierce 2s and 3s. Power Barrel can help us since it does slow down your shot so you can get more time on the monster, but it's really up to the size of the monster and whether or not Power Barrel is worth it. Sometimes you might not have enough time to get that extra tick. Also, I mentioned that it's the new Pierce because honestly there's almost no monsters where Pierce is more favorable than Elemental now. All the monsters that have decent gunner hit zones to abuse Pierce also have a good Elemental hit zone. Plus with Element you don't have to worry about tenderizing, which is a huge time saver. The only downside to Elemental is that it doesn't have a whole lot of ammo as well. Light Bowgun can struggle on some monsters with single shot element. Other than that, Elemental ammo is a great type right now. If you're getting into gunning, it's great for keeping distance and damage up at the same time. Dragon ammo is the only outlier here. There aren't very many Dragon Weak monsters, just the Wraths and I guess Ruiner Nergigante, but even so, we can't make builds around Dragon ammo. We can only carry 13 Dragon shots, which is not enough to do any significant damage to a monster to make builds around. So yeah, you can kind of ignore Dragon for now. Slicing ammo. Status ammo. Honestly, the only status are worth using are status 2s, but I do love having access to good status ammo on bowguns. Sometimes all you need is that one para or one sleep, and they really are just like a lifesaver. If you're deciding between two bowguns, always check status ammo. It's basically the tiebreaker for me every time. There's usually not much else of a difference between bowguns because their raws are pretty similar across the board, and so are the ammo archetypes. It's just about what they can load. Clusters. How did I get this far down and not mention clusters? Okay, so Capcom basically gutted clusters by making them unable to be used at point blank, so wake up clusters is not a thing anymore. And you can also only carry 5 bomb berries instead of 10, so we have also half the ammo. And they also got a slight damage nerf. So clusters are dead. The only reason why we use them anymore is to support sticky builds for heavy bowgun. Clusters are only used as backup ammo for sticky setups, so you can get some extra damage in on a down monster after you got it KO'd. Wyvern is in the same boat. It's decent, but not nearly as strong enough to justify the charge time, the reloads, and the ammunition capacity. They're only there so you can get through a hunt without needing a Firecaster, so don't worry too much about it. Okay, so that is your huge info depository on all the bowgun stuff. It's really a lot about knowing the ammo, knowing your gun, and knowing the monster. I will cover basically everything specific in other videos because there's so much that has to go into determining what's a good bowgun and what you should be using. And thankfully I have got all that done already, so just go back and check the other videos. So that's going to be it for now. So thank you all for watching and good luck out there, hunters, and whatever you may be hunting.